All right, so I'm going to introduce you to polar coordinates, which is what we're starting into. There's a lot of interesting things with polar coordinates that we'll look at. I think my favorite thing is looking at the graphs of polar coordinate equations because they look really interesting compared to some of our normal graphs. But before we can get to that, we got to understand what we're talking about with polar coordinates. So to start out, you are used to seeing Cartesian coordinates, okay? Named after Rene Descartes, famous mathematician, same guy as Descartes' rule of signs, okay? So, excuse me, in Cartesian coordinates, every point that we have is defined by a horizontal distance followed by a vertical distance. So if we're looking at this point right here, it might be defined as 4, 3. And all that's saying is 4 units over, 3 units up, okay? You guys are familiar with that. You've seen it plenty. We're going to look at polar coordinates. And for polar coordinates, it's a little different. We're dealing with instead, excuse me, instead we're dealing with a direction and a distance out, okay? So instead of horizontal and vertical distances, we're given maybe a direction of, say, it would be given actually the magnitude part first. So magnitude, and then the direction. Magnitude just means the distance out for this. So if you had the point, say 5 and 30 degrees, that would mean here's 0 degrees, and it could be done in radians as well. We could do the conversions with that. That would mean from 0 degrees, we would rotate 30 degrees upward, and they would follow that 5 units out. And the actual point, you wouldn't have this little line here, but that would be your point that is 5, 30 degrees. So it'd be 5 units out, 30 degrees from, excuse me, from the right-hand side of the x-axis, okay? So that's just kind of the introduction, what we're talking about with it. We also need to talk about, okay, how do we do some different things with it? How do we actually graph them if we're given polar coordinates? How do we say, find corresponding points to it? Because one thing is that we're going to run into is that polar coordinates can actually have an infinite number of ways of expressing, of being expressed. So that's one of the other things we're going to look at in this video.